How do I encourage people to find what contentment means to them? If you always are looking for the biggest net worth, then what are you losing in the time with your family or the experiences that matter to you?
The Phil Bach Podcast. Investing, economics, entrepreneurship.
Welcome back. We are back in downtown Detroit at Campus Martius Exponential ETF's headquarters, and we're back playing a home game. We're joined this week by Melissa Joy. Melissa is the founder and president of Pearl Planning in nearby Dexter, Michigan. She is a CFP, she's a CDFA, and is involved in numerous nonprofit activities, which we're going to learn about. Melissa is a frequent speaker and media personality, and we're going to learn about how Melissa started Pearl Planning and the differentiation of her firm and her story. So, Melissa, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Phil. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here, and I thought we'd start really right at the beginning of Pearl Planning. When you made the decision to launch the firm, as opposed to going to join a larger organization, what was that like from 2 points I want to start with? The decision to go off and do something entrepreneurial and build your own firm, as well as the processes and the steps that you had to take in order to be able to get your own firm off the ground.
Well, we only have to rewind about 18 months because Pearl Planning was founded in August of 2018. So it is a recent story. It's very relevant to everyday decisions right now. Over the spring and summer of 2018, I knew I needed to leave the larger wealth management firm that I'd been at. We were a hybrid independent firm, and I was a second-generation partner and owner. The company had singular goals for many years to get to $1 billion in assets under management. And when we got to that point and kind of achieved that goal, the direction of the company was more of the same. And I was looking for opportunities, change. I really loved all of the work that went into getting to that point, and it was time for me to find a new place to start building again. I had always been so envious of friends who started their own companies. So even though I had experienced the life of a business owner as a partner at a larger company, I just felt envy when I would have friends that started something new. And where other people might have seen fear or anxiety, to me, it was like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So I evaluated options. I talked to a lot of people, a lot of friends in the business about possibilities of collaborating, partnering, joining bigger companies. But I really felt like I would be leaving something on the table, missing a big opportunity if I did not start a company that was new and had never been done before. So there was an element of due diligence, but I landed where I thought I would with a new company.
The job of being a financial advisor or financial planner is very different than the job of being a business owner and a startup business owner. All of a sudden now you're dealing with operations and compliance and business financing and employees and all sorts of issues that are pretty far removed from what you love doing, which is working with the end clients and helping them. Are those two separate things that you now have to do? Are they related? Is it the same skill you have that translates from one to the other? Is it one necessitates the other? I mean, how do you balance those two different jobs, the job of being a CEO and the job of also being the chief financial advisor, financial planner for your company?
I think they're very different. It just so happens that I love them both. So most of my career, what we haven't touched on is that I grew up within a wealth management firm that was growing up itself. And for much of my career, I had my job was operational. It wasn't client-facing. So I had experience running an investment department. I built out a financial planning department. I was chief marketing officer. And I managed a lot of people along the way, a lot of strategic planning, all of those types of things. Those are the job of the entrepreneur. And the financial planning is something that you may or may not love that entrepreneurial side of things. In fact, as I was deciding what my next move would be, a lot of advisors, especially women, approached me and said, hey, when you get this started, let me know, because I love being a financial planner, but all of this compliance, the day-to-day, the balancing the budget, making everything work, that is not what I love to do. And it just so happens that for me, that's how I built my reputation within the business, was knowing that operational side. I'm glad that I have the opportunity to do financial planning, and it is what I love. Every day is different there too, but the building and running the business is something that I would not like to give up. It's something I love.
And for me too, I could say that I love that part of it, the entrepreneurial aspect of it. But when you're facing that decision of, do I want to, take a job, which, can have a lot of stability, or do I want to start something on my own? There's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of, you have young kids and you have a family, and there's a lot of uncertainty that comes along with it. How did you manage that fear? Did you embrace it? Did you just put it aside and say, yeah, I have all the confidence in the world? I mean, how did you address that?
Well, first, you'd probably agree, I had a good financial foundation to begin with. So I am someone who has always used other people as my financial planners, and I would not have felt as comfortable starting this venture without having, left a mature career where I planned, had emergency reserves, was someone who works in revenue is highly related to investments. So I, had the cash reserves that you would expect an entrepreneur to hopefully have if they're starting a new venture. But also I kind of created a zero-sum starting point in terms of how I measured success. So I knew that you cannot assume what your business or revenue is going to look like when you start something brand new. And I just made the assumption, if we start with zero revenue on day one, then I can build from there. I have 2 to 3 years of kind of runway in order to get started. Fortunately, I'm not in that circumstance, and we've been very successful launching, but I had to reorient my attitude and how I deemed and measured success so that it was realistic for a brand new firm.
So for anyone listening that might be thinking, you are an independent broker-dealer.
Right.
And if somebody's thinking that they want to go off on their own, as you did, what are the practical steps? How do they go about doing so? Is there like a checklist? Is there a blueprint that they could follow? Do they just start calling attorneys and compliance people? I mean, what's the easiest way or the most direct way that they can go about in achieving that?
Well, I think for many of us that do this, we have a lot of friends that are in the business. So talking to people that have recently organized businesses, it is less informative because of the changing regulations and compliance to talk to somebody that did it 10 or 20 years ago. While I am in the independent broker-dealer channel today, I probably, as a business, look more like a registered investment advisor. So I won't go into the details of that decision, but it was less bureaucratic and administrative overhead and potentially higher acquisition of clients in my personal situation that made me choose that path. But I think that I talked to a lot of different people and really weighed my options. And then I was weighing how the business should look long-term versus what I needed to have clients potentially on day one when I made that decision. And I think it's a business decision you need to evaluate regularly. So I'm thinking about how I want to be structured in 1 year from now, 5 years from now. It may or may not always be the same. And as a business owner in this market and how quickly things are changing in wealth management, certainly you need to stay on your toes.
Yeah. Now, one of the hallmarks of your firm is Pearl Planning is you are very female focused. There are 3 employees now at Pearl Planning. All 3 are female,
Yes.
including both advisors. Did that just happen to be? Was that a conscious decision? Is that part of the branding and differentiation of your firm?
I think it fits with the branding of me authentically marketing. So I'm a woman in the world of finance. It is more rare than you would think. About 15% of personal financial advisors are women. And I have spent much of the last 10 years focusing on providing opportunities for women in the field of financial advice with the belief that that will be a way for advice to be given or for people to get advice of all walks of life. So women as advisors increases the diversity of opinion within the field of financial advice. And it also is a relatable way to provide financial services to women. I love working with men, actually, and about 30 to 40% of my clients are men or heterosexual couples with men and women in the client relationship. But that focus on providing access for women advisors, I think, informs my marketing. And I am unwilling to put on a suit and pretend I'm someone who I'm not. So certainly my marketing may seem a little more female forward.
Now, you mentioned that you've spent a lot of your career providing opportunities to women in the financial advice space. What does that look like? How have you been able to do that?
It's such a passion project for me. So some of it has been more formal. So I custody my assets with Raymond James, and I served on their Women's Advisory Council. And that was a formal 5-year commitment where I went to meetings, met with executives at Raymond James, talked to women who were advisors about the roadblocks they had, advocated for more diverse hiring for recruitment pools. And that was very much, time. I'm going to be out of the office 3 times a year to be working on this. Also helping to create a major conference that had more than 400 attendees that we did annually. Other times it's just talking about issues. I've written for Financial Advisor magazine on what I see as the future of women's networks, informal and formal mentoring, and then just speaking in rooms that are more male about the opportunities for women and asking in many cases, hey, can we please look at our speaker rosters and make sure that there's diverse panelists at conferences? Are you interviewing women? If you're looking to interview women, here are some ideas of where you might find them. Money Smart Week is coming up in April, and I'll go to Michigan State and talk about careers in finance at Michigan State's new wealth management program. So it's just keeping that conversation going. And I know it's important to you, access for women and minorities. I'm intentionally expanding that conversation to people of color and access to advice and access to careers and advice for people of color at this point as well.
You said it was 15% of the industry is female?
Right. A lot of times you see a higher number because they include everyone who is registered, which would include registered sales assistants. So if you've gotten any licenses, but you're not client-facing, then you get added. But when you look at those numbers, it's about 15% are financial advisors and somewhere in the range of 20 to 22% of financial planners, certified financial planners.
So those are terrible numbers. And I think the question is that the result of less women who are attracted to the field that for whatever reason, that less job candidates, less people trying to get it, or is that because the field is inhospitable to women? Or is it some sort of mix in between? I mean, when you hear that, you say, okay, well, what can be done? What can be done to help those numbers? But also, where does that fault lie, and what are the reasons? And to better understand what the problem is and how to resolve it. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you think that the industry is inhospitable to women, that it's not as welcoming to women, or do you believe that it's for other factors and other reasons there are less women who are interested in the field?
Yes and yes. I think it's such a big problem. So at first, there's not natural kind of paths into careers as a personal financial advisor, right? So we have very immature college programs that are just kind of getting started. There's a few that have the history, but, Ally McBeal was an attorney, and you have 50-50 male and female attorneys. When it comes to that example of women in financial advice, there just aren't that many out there. I mean, maybe you can look at Billions, but Wendy's a psychologist. She's not on the front
That's
line.
right.
So I feel like that is part of it. It's always a win when you can have visibility for women in this business, because that hopefully is providing an example to other women. Once you get in that door, though, there still is a culture that is very familial. There's a culture of, this guy reminds me of me, I'm going to help bring them in. There's a lot of teaming up in order to get access to assets, because I would not expect a 23 or 25-year-old to go and find millions of dollars to manage. So that teaming factor is kind of where it's at. When I was younger, I was doing due diligence for investments, and I found that it was to my advantage to be one of the youngest people in the room and one of the only women. Because if I could ask something that sounded like just credible, not even smart, people to be like, oh, who's that? Because they weren't expecting to hear anything from me, first of all. And then second, I was memorable because I was so different than everybody else in the room. So I found ways to turn it to my advantage. But you've got to get in that door, and you've got to commit yourself to a little bit of fearlessness. And one of the challenges is that the numbers of women are growing, but the numbers of everybody everybody in our business is growing, right? So you've got to have an incremental pace of change that's greater than the overall rate of the profession and industry. Same goes for people of color, where the numbers are almost immeasurable. They're just so darn low that I really think that allies like you, Phil, are an important part of sharing the message. You know, like you've hired women decision makers on your team who are important parts of your team. I think that's great.
Well, we have one now. Well, we have two women who work for us. One that is a portfolio manager and really a standout employee. But when we put out a job, we get probably between 10 and 20% female applicants, and hopefully. Look, we're an early company, right? And we can't afford to not hire the most qualified, the best person. And if we're completely colorblind and completely gender blind, then, hopefully that the numbers will come out, fairly evenly distributed. And if it's getting to a point where we have to, make a conscious adjustment, I think we would at a certain point. But for a company of our size, right now we're 6 employees. I think when one spot comes open, our focus at this stage really has to be hiring the best person. That doesn't mean that that's not. I mean, of course, that doesn't mean that that's a certain demographic versus another. And, I think, as a whole, the industry, you see a lot of initiatives and a lot of people really trying to implement tangible actions to really address that. So I've had several of the women who are co-founders of Women in ETFs on the podcast, and what they've done in the ETF industry is really phenomenal. They are one of the largest organizations they're everywhere. You can't be in the ETF industry and not see what they've done. And I think they've really, done some wonderful things for women in ETFs. And if you look at the percentage of women in the ETF industry versus the mutual fund industry, it's far better. Both clearly still need, have some work to do.
Both not competitive with the real world, but yes. And having someone with the title portfolio manager is a big deal. Having a woman with the title of portfolio manager, when you see the studies that say that women on hedge fund teams have better results, I'm like, because you have to be a gold medalist to be a woman on a hedge fund team. In terms of I don't know how it comes to that, but there's just so few. So I hope that you'll continue to hire with an open mind, but I acknowledge that there just are very few portfolio managers that are women, and the numbers are better in ETFs, and I really appreciate that. But that's an even bigger conversation than women advisors. That's not a 15%. That's like a 1.5%.
Wow. Yeah. What about from the client point of view? Do you find any biases when people are interviewing you or other financial advisors? Are there biases that you've encountered from the point of view of the client where they decide to allocate their money?
Where they allocate, or where, like, hiring me?
Hiring you.
So I think they probably self-selected, because I think if 100% of people that hire me haven't visited my website, then I'd be shocked, right? That's the business card of the 21st century. So they know who I am. My picture is front and center, as well as the whole team. And we're purple, not gray and navy. So we're already way different than most financial firms. What I find is my friends who are other advisors will be like, Melissa, you cater just to women, and that's so cool. And the reality is a lot of men hire me as well. And I'm getting great organic traction from web marketing, from social media marketing, and just having a good website. So I would push back. I'm sure there are some people that have self-selected and said that looks like the woman place, but for the most part, I find that people want someone they can trust, and I talk to them in a relatable way that makes them comfortable hiring me.
Another aspect of your firm is you are a CDFA, a Certified Divorce Financial Analyst.
Right.
And you look at divorce in this country, it's the worst. So I've been through a divorce. It is the worst. I mean, obviously for many emotional reasons and all that, but from like the bureaucratic processes and the financial stuff, I mean, it is unbelievable. Everyone's talking about this movie Marriage Story that just came out on Netflix. So I suffered through it. I thought it was horrible. It gave me like PTSD from my experiences. But that financial aspect. It sounds
like a scary movie to me too. I haven't watched it yet, but I will have to commit.
It was horrible. I mean, people loved it. I don't know the acting. I'll admit that the acting was good, but it just basically showed how awful the process is. Two people get divorced, and first it starts off they love each other, then they're getting divorced, and they want to keep it nice, cool, and friendly, and then by the end, it's not so. And I think a lot of real divorces follow that same script, and it's really a shame. How did you become a CDFA and incorporate that into your business? Was that just kind of random? Did it randomly happen, or what are your experiences with that part of it?
So I am the child of a divorce, and my parents divorced when I was in middle school. I feel like I love both my parents, but they had really inequitable outcomes from the divorce. So my mom was staying home with kids. She was a former teacher with a master's degree, but she wasn't teaching at the time. And my dad was an executive running a mortgage company. And the outcome of that was that my mom didn't want to change the house. She didn't want to sell the house. So we lived in a big house, had very little money to pay the bills. She really put her entire life on pause. She was a woman who'd never opened a bank account before in her late 30s. So it's very personal to me because I don't want to sick it to anybody. I think they both should have gotten an equitable outcome. But I really care about the financial decisions that are made during divorce because I know the impact they have throughout life. There are people that are CDFAs that are the people that you would hire to go in and between both sides argue for a better outcome for both sides. My preference is to work with people. I'm happy to work with them during divorce, but what I want to do is make sure that the work that has started during the divorce is carried through and that people are getting the best outcomes managing the transition in their life so that a lot of times people are kind of left on the doorstep after the divorce where they've got a big list of things to do that they may or may not have the emotional capacity or the knowledge to get through.
Like what kind?
You need to do a quadro in order to divide retirement assets. You need to retitle accounts. You probably need an updated estate plan. You may or may not have the knowledge you need to make the investment decisions with the assets that have been managed. You need to figure out your cash flow and whether it fits with your new circumstances. Obviously, things have been reduced, if not divided by 2, in terms of your overall net worth. Managing your kids and their education. There's so many things that are kind of in the ideal list that may or may not ever happen for someone. And you also have, as you know, Phil, like the emotional roller coaster that you've just gone through. You're probably still, if it's recent, in shock. There's a bit of PTSD. So how do you approach your new life with financial confidence? And frankly, financial confidence and reducing financial shame is something that I talk about with all of my clients. You'd be shocked. It does not matter how many zeros are in your net worth as to how insecure you might feel about money or your ability to make decisions about money. So it fits right back in with that.
What would you say is your overarching investment philosophy?
So as I mentioned before, I grew up within the business. My first kind of non-administrative job was doing research and due diligence, and I was an investment analyst. And I grew up in a very active management philosophy within the company that I worked for. Nowadays, I really see the world of investing changing. It used to be where you would sell your value. You would say that, we invest better than them. And nowadays, I just think that that's been commoditized. There's a lot of ways to mess it up, but when you get to the point where you're looking to add value, I see the people that are marketing that they are, kind of the kingslayer of how you invest. I approach those with a lot of skepticism. So I'm looking when investing to have strategies that will be consistent. I'm looking for strategies that approach risk in a cost-effective way. I'm looking for strategies that can be persistently implemented. There's a huge dynamic of change in terms of cost structure of how you invest. So I invest with models. They are more and more passive with factor investing included in what I would consider passive. So it's just not all about market cap. And I use technology in order to invest so that I can manage millions of dollars in an appropriate manner. I also think that there's a deficiency in the financial advisory world in terms of their ability to implement portfolios. So if you're not using rebalancing software, if you're not being tax aware in the way you invest, these are big gaps that people don't realize that they're missing out on. Asset location, using tax selling when you have a difficult market, which we haven't had. But, if you weren't doing some adjustments in portfolios in late 2018, early 2019, I'm scratching my head as to how tax aware you are if you're investing for high net worth people. So those are, my philosophy is keep it simple. and stay within guidelines of, and it's also been 10 years since we've had a downturn, and invest assuming that you don't know what tomorrow will be. 70% of days will be sunny, but there's also a rainy day, and you need to be prepared for both.
Yeah, I mean, coming up early in your career where you were, running due diligence on funds and on asset managers and in a world that really valued active management. And now when you're looking at, factor funds and just the fees, of course, the fees are so much lower than they ever were, even on active strategies. And even on, what I would say a factor strategy is, like I would call that an alpha seeking strategy, no different than actively management, just implemented in a different and, sometimes more efficient way. But
definitely it's more disciplined, right? If you take out in some cases, and this is not a blanket statement, but the element of potential human fallacy when
That's
it
right.
comes to, decision making.
Sure. I mean, all of our funds all of our proprietary funds are all rules-based,
Right.
systematic processes. Even we have a strategy that uses consumer data that looks more like an active strategy from the standpoint of the goal of the fund is to outperform, and the goal of the fund is to use our proprietary data to do so. And, what you end up with is certain stocks that we can talk about that are more, geared towards the active management narrative and story. We can say, hey, here's a company that we really like that we're bullish on for these reasons. But in implementation, it's all completely systematic and rules-based. We have no mechanism to override the data, nor would we. So it's a different thing, and it's a real paradigm shift. What I wanted to ask was, coming out of a 10-year bull market, or maybe halfway to a 20-year bull market. I mean, who knows?
I'll take it, right?
Right. In the event of a market crash, maybe that happens tomorrow, maybe it doesn't, we don't know. In the event that it does, do you think that there'll be a return to investing the way that it used to look, the way it looked when you came up 10 years ago, where you're talking about active strategies and active discretion and trying to weigh that? Or do you think that this is a shift that is here to stay and there's a new paradigm, and even in the event of a market crash, there are certain things that are never coming back, and active management being one of them?
Categorically, no. Do I think that we're returning to the way it always was? First of all, when you look at the numbers and studies that say who outperformed, like the drumbeat, not from asset managers, but from advisors that still invest active only, the drumbeat is we cannot afford to change, because when the next downturn occurs, these guys are going to save us, these investments. And look at the studies of what the performance is when you're in a downturn. That is not the case. It's just because there are some people that outperform does not mean that you would have chosen that investment. In fact, it's been so long since you have any data on, persistent down markets. You have to put in 15 or 20 years to your track record, which typically things only go back 10 years. It's harder to look. Who even knows who was the portfolio manager back in the day? They probably lost their job because they're still investing for that down market. So no, I do not think it will go back. There's no way that you can build back in those fees. So things are changing significantly. That doesn't mean that I don't believe that there's a future for active management. I just think that it's a more competitive environment, which I honestly think is making active options better investments for my clients as well. So active options are experiencing price pressure, right? They're not priced the same way they were, even if their market share is declining.
Right. And a lot of that cost savings is intermediaries and the way products are being distributed, which is going away, which is clearly a win for investors at the end of the day, regardless of what happens between active and passive going forward.
I agree. And I still think there's value for intermediaries. And I think that access to information that large institutions can provide and other services is important. But you have to be able to unbundle the structure and justify the cost. And you do not want your clients to be paying for other advisors' boondoggles. So it is a changing world, and it always has been, right? So we only had 401ks for 40 years. The concept of mutual funds is less than 100 years old. So this is not, the assumption that things will go back to the way they always were is rarely proven in my observations in our world.
I wanted to ask about something on your website that I thought was really interesting. So you had 3 words: abundance, philosophy, and possibility. I thought that was really interesting. Those are very, each one is kind of different and not something that you typically see on a financial advisor website. Tell me about those three: abundance, philosophy, possibility, and what those mean to you.
So I guess abundance was really important to me, especially as I was founding the firm, because I did not, and it goes back to when you asked about how I felt how did I approach the fear and the anxiety of a startup? I knew I had to have like a positive attitude and know that it's going to work out. I had turned down many valuable offers in order to make that decision. And so abundance was really important to me. But I also think as someone who's advising people in their financial decisions, if you go in with a scarcity mentality, it informs all of your decisions and makes everything more negative. One of the interesting things that I've been contemplating, because abundance mentality is a part of our values, is what is the relationship between abundance and contentment? So sometimes abundance can be more, more, more. And I think you have to have an abundance mentality before you can determine what contentment is to you. But that's something that's kind of been carrying some shelf space in my brain recently, is like, how do I encourage people to find what contentment means to them? In terms of stuff, decisions, how much is enough? If you always are looking for the biggest net worth, then what are you losing in the time with your family or the experiences that matter to you? Philosophy is, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, just on that, do you think contentment is a more attainable goal than like happiness?
Oh gosh, I do not. I think contentment is like the hardest thing ever to define. What really makes you feel what is enough is a real challenge, and to find that with open arms, not with a feeling of being scared or anxious. And I think that they're so intertwined, happiness and contentment. If you're just pursuing a moment at a time where you feel happy versus you have a state of happiness, then you've got to be exploring that concept of contentment. So I don't know that all of the answers on that. I think it's like higher level. That's like way up on Maslow's hierarchy of financial decisions or financial, aspirations. But I'm willing to spend some time thinking about it, and I'm so excited we can talk about it.
Okay, so the next one was philosophy.
So philosophy, I think that if you are working with an advisor, then you want somebody who's not just thinking technically, but has a point of view with how they're going to work with you, with how they think about, just like we just talked about investing or abundance. I want someone who is not just checking off a checklist, but is really encouraging you to approach things with a higher level of thinking. And so philosophy has always mattered to me in terms of, are you coming to this with a point of view or just a to-do list? And I guess I would prefer to be a little more intellectual in my approach to working with clients.
And the last one was my favorite one, which is possibility.
So to me, people often come with a problem, but hopefully we'll work together. And in my experience, I work with clients over years, if not at this point, decades. So opening their mind to possibility, first getting through the things that they need to wade through or the challenges. Maybe it is, post-divorce planning, which is very difficult. But then if you can get to the point where you encourage people to be more aspirational in their goals, be more meaningful with their purpose, defining their purpose, and then seeing how that can inform their actions and decisions. That to me is what, makes the world of financial advice so rewarding. It's all about influencing change in people's lives, change that they didn't know was possible for themselves, but that they really come up with. It's not me telling them what to do. It's them asking me, is this possible? And us working together to make it work.
So, Melissa, the last time I saw you in person was at the Build Institute party. They were celebrating new office space, beautiful office space in Detroit. You serve on the board of the Build Institute, along with a guy named Matty Yohannan, who invited me over to the event, the great and mysterious Matty Yohannan. I love the Build Institute. I'll get into why, but why don't you tell us a little bit about what it is and your involvement with it?
So Build Institute is an organization that was founded by April Boyle that has classes for entrepreneurs or aspiring future business owners to teach them how to open a business. And as I was driving in here, there are so many new businesses here in downtown Detroit that were not here a year ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. But much of the ideas and the kind of the impetus has been very corporate in downtown Detroit. It's also been very technology oriented. And the vision of Build is to fill out all of the businesses that you need to really make a community happen. So that's your mom and pop grocery store that's in a neighborhood in Detroit that has been a food desert in the past. Or that's a restaurant. There's a lot of restaurants and retail that go through Build Institute training. It's wonderful because most Build graduates or people that enroll in their classes are women and people of color. And it's a very accessible, it provides opportunities, going back to opportunity. It's creating opportunities here in Metro Detroit. It's a wonderful model. And the thing I love about it most, having served on nonprofits and boards in the past, is that this is like real work that is actually happening. It's not an aspiration or idea. It is a reality. So there's hundreds of Build grads. There are businesses and employment. There's a huge economic impact from this organization. I just happened to meet April Boyle at a networking event about 4 or 5 years ago and loved her story, loved the impact that she's having on Metro Detroit. And I joined the board in the summer of 2018. So I'm just helping to assist increase visibility of Build, helping to make board decisions, and absolutely loving that. Having been a member of the Metro Detroit professional community for many years, I was embarrassed by my lack of commitment to Detroit. If you are spending more time talking about Detroit's problems than doing something about it, then I'd encourage you to change your philosophy. And that's why it was really important to me to spend more time in Detroit. And this was a wonderful way to do it.
I love it. I love the organization. I love the organization's mission. I got to meet a lot of the entrepreneurs at the event, and it was just so cool. It's like the old thing, like, give a man a fish versus teach a man to fish. Like,
yeah.
When
Or
a
woman.
or a woman, of course. Yep.
Yes.
And when you're training people on entrepreneurship, it's like you're not just training them on their dream. It's also everyone who they're going to hire. And what's going to happen with that business over a long period of time? If that's a 40-year business, if you start a bakery that lasts for 40 years, that's 40 years of employees coming and going, of value, equity value created in that company, in that small business that could then be, sold or handed down, or you could bring in other partners. You're creating something from nothing that has value, that creates, value for the clients that are using it, for the employees that are there. I just think it's such an impactful, wonderful thing. And like you said, it's not going through, corporations and big monopoly companies. It's not, hey, we're going to open another Walmart here. These are mom and pop, independent people working for themselves, achieving their American dream. I think it's like the greatest thing, and I really love it. And, really want to congratulate you on the success of Build Institute and give a shout out to April and the team over there.
Yeah, I don't think I had much to do with it, but I am so...
Oh, you did? Don't be too humble.
But I do think that it is interconnected with what we do, whether we're providing equitable access to financial products as you're doing, as well as me working with people in their personal financial decisions. This is the way. You have to have money changing hands and foot in the door. Going to volunteer to teach financial literacy when people don't have bank accounts does not work. And that's in the past when I've sought to make a change in Detroit. That type of volunteer work was what people asked me to do. And I was like, we need to build the building blocks. And that's exactly what Build is doing. If the jobs aren't there, it's teaching people how to create the jobs themselves, which is a big deal.
A huge deal. And I think it's wonderful. Let's talk about some personal finance tips. So I see you have a series that's out now that you're working on, which is 52 Pearls, which is every week. If you don't mind, just pick out a couple personal finance tips for our audience, which is for the most part financial professionals or people that are, somewhat advanced in investing, but things that they don't think about. Like me, for example, I would say that I'm, extremely well versed in the art of investing or institutional investing. But my personal finances are a total mess. I'm sloppy with the bills. I just, I haven't looked at my credit card APR probably in like 10 years since I signed up for it. So it's certainly an area where I could use some help. What do you think are the most, just a couple from a high level, most practical personal finance tips?
So I've had so much fun with this project. We basically just post a mini bite of something actionable you can do that is built for any audience. And it's been so rewarding to do, but also a great marketing strategy. So there is so much low-hanging fruit because I think that I love clients like you, Phil, where you're like, I do not have time to do all the little things, but I know how to invest. And I'm like, I guarantee you that there are ways we could find, to pay for my entire engagement times 5 in a 30-minute conversation. So, first of all, what parts of your life do you need to outsource because they're not going to be done or it's not worth your time? If you need a bookkeeper on your personal stuff or somebody that just looks over things every 3 months or somebody for household help, if you're, kind of playing the single dad game, however that works, those are things that I suggest that people do that can afford it. Reviewing your auto homeowners insurance because things change. Michigan law has changed in 2020 in terms of auto, and shopping around can save you money. I often say save clients money there. Reviewing your estate planning is something that I'm not an estate planner, but I talk to clients about what documents they need. And 80% when they come to me say, we need this, who should I hire? So make sure that you look over things. And then calendaring things. So making times in your calendar where you review what should be done, whether it's a reminder for your tax estimates or it's a reminder to boost your 401k savings, or here's when you should gather all of your charitable gifts. Those are things that are very valuable. There's a group of clients too that I found is kind of coming to me, which are the people that are great savers. They are maxing out their 401ks, but then everything else is just piling up because they haven't figured out what type of account to open, where to invest. That may not be your audience because, they're a little more sophisticated. They know how to open a financial account, but there's somewhat stasis once you kind of fill up one bucket where you may be leaving low-hanging fruit, whether it's like a backdoor Roth conversion or you're able to do some after-tax contributions to a corporate 401k. So there's a lot of opportunities. Everybody's different, but I always find something that may be useful for the clients.
All right, I got to brush up on the series and make sure that I'm doing everything I should be doing. Melissa, I like to close with this question. Tell me about an obstacle that you've had either in your life or your career that you either found a way around or that you just persisted through.
Well, I kind of see my career in mountains. So there was the first mountain, which was when I didn't really have a lot of direction. I kind of stumbled upon investment analysis first. And then I climbed a big mountain when I converted my former firm into discretionary management, into models. And I always felt like that was the mountain I would always be on, whether it was, I just had a job looking for a career and I needed to hop off, not sure where, or I really thought I would be very investment focused. I've talked a lot about financial planning today, so you can see I've made the shift. While I haven't given up my investment experience, I'm a little more well-rounded today, or a little different area of focus. And so at that point, I became client-facing. But 2 years ago, like I said, I did not know that I would be running my own firm, would have founded a new company. And I came to a crossroads in my career where it was time for a change. And I definitely could have taken the safe route. I definitely relied on my network of friends, and I have always kind of been the advisor's expert especially when I was in the investing side. I had developed a lot of friends in the business because that gave me an identity in the business. And so I relied on their help. But a lot of people really wanted, when I was transitioning to a new business or, looking, people wanted to take care of me. And I think the thing that was most important to me was I woke up and I needed help from my friends and community, but I did not need to be taken care of. It was not a charity case. I had a ton of experience. I think it's wonderful to be Gen X in our business because you have both a couple decades in, but also you've got a lot of runway in your career. And so it was the perfect sweet spot to start something new and be able to see it through. And the ability to kind of step above myself and say, I've got every tool I need to start something new. And actually, this is what I've always dreamed of. That kind of cognizance was really important to me. And then relying on my network for help, but not to be taken care of.
Well, congratulations on founding your own company.
Thank you.
And everything that you've done so far and transitioning over to that side of the business and pulling it off, and the growth that you've had and your work with Build Institute. Congratulations. Really incredible story. Of course, the most of which is still to come, and we look forward to that. So thank you. How can people learn more about working with you at Pearl Planning?
Well, please feel free to visit my website at pearlplan.com. I'm also active on LinkedIn, Melissa Joy. And if you are interested in the 52 Pearls, we have a 12-month calendar that's a free downloadable PDF at pearlplan.com/52pearls.
Great. Well, thanks again. Thank you to the audience for your time and attention. Please like, rate, subscribe, or review the podcast if you're so inclined, and we'll be back next week.
Thank you for listening to the Phil Bach Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to drop a review. This show was published for entertainment purposes only and is not investment advice. Please contact a licensed professional before making any investments. Some of the securities discussed on the show may be owned by its participants. Opinions expressed on the show may not reflect those of their employers. Stay hungry and stay foolish.